properties have already been identified and are currently being looked at. A significant number of people have already been assessed for their housing needs. Some have already been offered housing. It is, of course, up to them as to whether they accept that or whether other properties will need to be offered to them. But that process is in hand, and I have set that 3-week commitment that people will be rehoused within 3 weeks. The tenant management organisation, which the Leader of the Opposition mentioned, is an issue that has come across loud and clear to me from my conversations with local residents. I think one of the first acts of the new Chief Executive of Kensington and Chelsea Council will be to look at that issue around the tenant management organisation and any action that needs to be taken there. And then the Leader of the Opposition referred to other instances. Hillsborough and the child sexual abuse inquiry were the two that he cited. I was pleased to be able to work with the families from Hillsborough. They should have had justice at a far earlier stage, but of course the issues are ongoing in terms of the Crown Prosecution Service looking at any potential criminal charges, but we have been able to provide the Hillsborough families with an opportunity for the truth, for them to know the truth of what happened to their loved ones, and for the public to know the truth of Hillsborough. I was also pleased to set up the child sexual abuse inquiry because I agreed, and as I said when I set up that inquiry, for too long people have made assumptions about certain people in our society and how they should be treated, and those assumptions are wrong. And we need to dig into that, and we need to find out why it has happened, and we need to change it.
Order. I'm very keen to accommodate the level of interest in this extraordinarily important and grave subject. May I please appeal to colleagues to help me to help them? There is a premium upon brevity, to be brilliantly exemplified, I feel sure now, by Mr. Ian Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, may I welcome the Prime Minister's statement and also welcome the actions that she said she's going to take and the government will take. Our hearts and prayers go out to all of those who suffered so terribly and who will continue to suffer in the days that come. Can I, however, in the course of the public inquiry, ask her to add to the public inquiry one further remit, and that is to look at whether or not this whole process of retrofitting these old tower blocks is in fact viable at all, and whether or not there is a better way to both house and support tenants in these areas without the use of many of these incredibly badly designed and very faulty tower blocks. And could she ask the public inquiry to look carefully at whether or not it's feasible now for us to look at bringing some of these down and improving more family-friendly housing?
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for his remarks. He's suggesting that the inquiry should in fact go a great deal further than looking into this particular instance. I think what is important, and we will ensure that the survivors and local residents have an input to the terms of reference for this inquiry to make sure that it is an inquiry that they can have confidence in and that they know will produce the results that they need and the justice that they need. I think we need to ensure, I will reflect on my right honourable friend's comments, but I think it's important primarily that the local residents feel confidence in the terms of reference in the inquiry and that it will get to the truth as they need it.
Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that we all in this House, and I'm sure throughout the entire United Kingdom, welcome the opportunity of the Prime Minister's statement this morning. I think we can all reflect on the scenes that we woke up to last week, the horror of those that were living in the tower block, the suffering and the pain that they must have gone through, the agony of seeing the fire spread through that building. And I want to also thank the members of the emergency services, in this case and other incidents that we've seen over the course of the last few weeks, putting their lives on the line, and we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to them. We on these benches want to work with the government on these matters. These are, I think, the incident last week is a defining moment in the evolution of our society. Can I say to the Prime Minister respectfully, though, she has apologised to the Leader of the Opposition for the short notice, but it shouldn't just be to the Leader of the Opposition, it should be to the third party and indeed all parties represented in this House that there should be adequate provision. The Prime Minister in her statement said that the initial failure was then compounded by the fact that the support on the ground in the initial hours was not good enough. Can I ask that through the public inquiry, if there are recommendations that are made, the changes that have to be made, that the government will accept those? I think secondly, on the £5 million which has been put into the initial emergency fund, If this is not sufficient, will the Government commit to doing what it needs to in order to make sure that the appropriate financial resources are available? I welcome the fact that the Prime Minister has said that the new housing block that's been built by Berkeley Homes will be made available for some of the families, and she talks about families moving in over the summer. Can she be more specific as to when this will happen, and can we make sure that those families who do wish to live in the local area will have that commitment that housing will be made available, and it will be done on the basis that there will be consultation, and if the first offer is not acceptable, that there will be alternatives that can be put in place? Will the Prime Minister agree that the public inquiry should be empowered to consider all the steps that were not taken leading up and contributing to this incident? All of those with a legitimate interest must be able to participate. This has to include the bereaved families, survivors as well as individuals, and organisations with an interest such as the Residents' Campaign and local representative organisations. This needs to be about Parliament recognising the significance of what has happened here. We can never be, as a country, in this position again. And I welcome the remarks that the Prime Minister has made about social housing. Let's make sure that social housing is something that we invest in. I grew up in a social house. I remember fondly my childhood, and I want people that have the same opportunities that we had to have social housing that we can all be proud of.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And perhaps I could take this opportunity in responding to the honourable gentleman to make it clear that the testing facilities that I referred to earlier are open to the devolved administrations as well. So I would also encourage, obviously, within the devolved administrations, again, anybody who has any buildings that of this sort to send those samples in so they can be tested. The honourable gentleman asked about the £5 million fund. It will indeed, if necessary, more money will be made available. As I said, something like £700,000 has already been paid out, and further monies will be paid out, but we will be looking at that sum over time. As regards the Berkeley Homes development, the planning conditions which were attached to that development have been relaxed to enable work to take place over longer hours so that the work can be speeded up. The current expectation is that these could be available by the end of July. But I say that caveated, as the honourable gentleman and others I'm sure will recognise that it's dependent on the work being completed. He asked about issues around the inquiry. It is important, it's absolutely crucial that what the inquiry does, it seems to me, is to look at how this happened, and part of that will be looking at what led up to the fire, at the response to the fire, the immediate response to the fire, and the aftermath. We need to know why this happened and who was responsible for it. But of course, the judge who will be chairing the inquiry will have a role in determining how that inquiry is handled in terms of the witnesses that he wishes to take and so forth. But as I said, I'm very clear that we need to ensure that this is an inquiry in which people can have full confidence, and that's why I want to see residents being involved in setting the terms of reference so that they know that it is an inquiry that is going to meet their needs.
Rhys Villiers.
Will the Prime Minister encourage local authorities to follow the lead set by Barnet Council with an immediate re-inspection of their high-rise blocks and the announcement of a programme of investment in new safety measures to be guided by the fire service and to include sprinklers where these are needed?
Can I thank my right honourable friend for drawing that to the attention of the House. I commend Barnet Council for the action that they've taken. I hope every local authority has been asked by DCLG to undertake these tests and to ensure that they are ensuring the safety of the properties in which they are accommodating people.
Emma Dent Code.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the Prime Minister for her kind words, words which must be followed by deeds. Yeah. Speaking on behalf of a traumatised and frightened community who have little trust in authority. Early reports suggest that there may have been issues with fire safety audits and fire regulations were not sufficiently robust. While we wait for the results of the inquiry, which I hope won't be too long, will the Prime Minister commit to adequate funds to enable emergency services, and particularly the London Fire Brigade, to be fully funded to carry out this work and reverse the cuts to the funding of fire services that have made their lives so difficult? These people have quite literally our lives in their hands. In short, where is the funding? Yeah.
Well, when I spoke to the emergency services immediately, obviously my first visit to Kensington, one of the challenges I gave to them was, did they have the resources they needed to be able to do the job that they were doing? And they assured me that they did. Obviously, the question of what the inquiry will look into in relation to this matter, they will obviously have to look at, as I've just said, at the whole question of how this was possible that this could happen, the issue around I'm sure that the inquiry will look at the issue around tests that were taken place on the tower and the adequacy of those tests and the adequacy of any response to those issues. I want the inquiry to find these things out as soon as possible, because that could have implications for others, local authorities, and for other blocks around the country, and we want to ensure people's safety.
Perhaps I can be the first person publicly to congratulate the Honourable Lady on her election to the House and on being, albeit in the most grave and traumatic circumstances, the first newly elected member to put a question in this chamber. And she's done so to the Prime Minister. I congratulate the Honourable Lady on her contribution. Zach Goldsmith.
Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Prime Minister for her statement and for the reassurance she's provided, and also take this opportunity to thank my own two boroughs, Richmond and Kingston, for having conducted urgent reviews and provided reassurance to residents. Mr. Speaker, there will be people in positions of authority who will probably be fearing the implications of a proper public inquiry, and for the same reason there are likely to be people in the community affected who fear that there won't, as a result, be a full public inquiry. That scepticism will be there for obvious reasons. So I want to ask the Prime Minister if she'll say a little bit more about the terms of reference for the public inquiry and explain how local residents will have meaningful input into how they are set. Thank you.
I fully recognise the picture that my honourable friend has set out in relation to the inquiry. That's why I think it's important that it's a judge-led inquiry. The judge will be completely independent. It will be up to them to determine the witnesses that will be called and how they will manage the inquiry. And I think this is very important, because we want people to have the confidence of knowing that when the inquiry reports, it will be bringing the truth out. We also want people to have the confidence to know that actions that arise as a result of the implications, the findings of that inquiry, will be taken, and those who are responsible will be held to account. In relation to the terms of reference, as I've said, residents will be involved. We're in the process at the moment of looking at how it is possible to do that. The judge who is leading the inquiry will themselves want to reflect on how they want to speak with residents, how they want to hear from residents. But I think the message I've had from residents about being able to bring a survivors group together as a single voice is a very important one and will be a helpful one in this regard.
Harriet Harman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for her statement. I think the news that she's given the House today, that the cladding was indeed combustible, and it having been tested, it showed it was combustible, is chilling news and will be horrifying confirmation of what we all saw on our television screens. But it will be even more frightening for those. I mean, there are 58 tower blocks in my constituency, thousands all around the country. Can I suggest, as Prime Minister, that she gets a grip on this personally right away, and that what she does is, well, I'm just going to make a suggestion, if I may, that what she does is use COBRA to call together and require all local authorities within a certain time frame to check the cladding on every one of their tower blocks. If she has done that, then I look forward to hearing that and look forward to hearing the timescale. So to call together all local authorities, to have a requirement on them to check every cladding on every tower block, to give them the resources to do that inspection within a certain timescale, to commit the resources to replace the cladding within a certain timescale where others find it is combustible. I think that if that is exactly what COBRA should be done for, and it's not good enough to just congratulate or encourage other councils, she must take a grip on it personally. She said that the Lakanal House coroner's inquest findings had been acted on. but I would tell her that they have not. The coroner in 2013 in Lakanal House said that those deaths were avoidable, that there should have been sprinklers, that there should have been change in the fire instructions, that there should be greater supervision of contracts and fire inspection. She said that it was an unimaginable tragedy and that those deaths should not have happened. They would not have happened if the government had acted on the Lakanal coroner's inquest rulings.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister.
Can I say to the Right Honourable Lady, first of all, to clarify what I said in my statement. What I said in my statement was that local authorities had been invited to send in samples of cladding from similar buildings. They had done those, and some of those samples had been found to be combustible. It was in relation to that testing that I used the term combustible. I think it's important that, that I do that, because we had taken, as the Right Honourable Lady has suggested, we had taken the precautionary measure immediately of asking local authorities, all local authorities, to go out there to identify blocks with similar cladding and to take measures together with their local fire and rescue services to ensure that people within those buildings were safe. Part of that process has been about the testing. As I say, we stand ready to continue to test for all local authorities who wish to send samples in. The description of the coroner's report from Lakanal House, the coroner did not, as I understand it, say that there should be sprinklers in every one of these types of properties. But what is important is that, because what underpinned what she was saying was the necessity of making sure that people living in similar blocks are able to feel reassured about their safety. We have taken the steps. Local authorities have been working with fire and rescue services. We are now going back after the results of these tests of cladding are being given back to local authorities. They are immediately acting to ensure the safety of people within. There's a number of steps that they can undertake, and we expect them to do what is necessary.
Sir Richard Bacon. Mr. Speaker, in recent years, London has seen many high-quality high-rises being built, often financed with hot foreign money, and then left empty for years, sometimes with the kitchens cling-filmed and pristine. While we all understand there are occasions when a landlord will need to leave an apartment empty from time to time, when brand new properties are empty for many years, does the Prime Minister think it's right to discuss with her honourable friend the Chancellor of the Exchequer changing the taxation regime so that, as in New York City, these people face punitive taxation?
My honourable friend raises an interesting point, and he's taken a long interest in issues relating to housing in his time in this House. I understand, in fact, the number of empty homes is actually at low levels at the moment. And, of course, we always look to see what we can do. What we want to ensure is that people are housed and that properties are being used for the purpose in which they've been built.
Jim Fitzpatrick.
Mr. Speaker, whether rich or poor, if the building regulations are fit for purpose, we should all be protected from fire in our own homes. What assurance can the Prime Minister give that the review of building regulations and approved document B, as recommended by the Lakanal House coroner, will be done as urgently as possible, and that BRAC, the Building Regulatory Advisory Committee, which historically has undertaken this work, be recalled as a matter of urgency? This can be done in tandem with the public inquiry. It doesn't have to wait till the end of it.
The honourable gentleman, obviously, with his background, has a particular interest in these issues. The coroner's recommendation was in relation not to changing the regulations, but the guidance that followed those regulations, and that work is indeed in hand. My understanding is that the fire regulations have not been changed since 2006. Obviously, the public inquiry will want to look at this as one of the issues that they address.
Is Cheryl Gillan?
The amount of remedial work that may need to be carried out on a limited timescale will possibly mean great pressures fall on the workforce that is capable of carrying out this remedial work. Will the Prime Minister ensure that her colleagues in government make all the necessary funds and resources available if we need to recruit or train further personnel to carry out the remedial work on those blocks that fail the tests?
My right honourable friend raises a very important point. We need to ensure that the resources are there in every sense for the remedial work that is necessary, and we're looking at a variety of ways in which we can ensure that that is indeed the case.
Mr. David Lammy.
all members of this House, across this House, will have mentored, employed and want to see flourish young people. My wife principally, and I, mentored, employed and encouraged a young woman called Khadija Say, who lost her life with her mother on the 20th floor of Grenfell Tower. I spoke to her father on Tuesday, and he described, with anguish obviously, losing his only daughter. And we had a discussion about how he would cope in going to the mortuary to visit his daughter in the state that clearly she is in. On their behalf, and all of the people that died, I urge the Prime Minister to say something more about the criminal investigation that was announced last week. She has talked about the public inquiry, but she understands that most people see this as a crime, and they know that rich and powerful organisations get away with crime. Can she say what resources have been brought to bear for the Metropolitan Police? How big are the teams? And why is it that we have not had any commentary about charges, about arrests, or about the seizure of documents?
Can I first of all say how sorry I am to hear that the Right Honourable Gentleman has lost somebody, a friend, in this terrible tragedy. There are obviously many people in that position, but it brings it home to this House and right into this chamber. He mentioned the issue of bereavement. If I could just mention that there is a family bereavement centre now opened, which provides a suitable place in which people can be counselled in relation to this matter. And there is a great deal of thought and care being undertaken in relation to those families who will obviously be wanting to see bodies of those who have died in the fire. This is a very sensitive and difficult matter, as I'm sure all members of this House will recognise, and every action is being taken to do this as sensitively and thoughtfully as possible, with the consideration of those who've lost loved ones. In relation to the criminal investigation has been opened by the Metropolitan Police. The Right Honourable Gentleman invites me to comment on that in a whole variety of ways. As he will know, this is an operational matter for the Metropolitan Police. It is for them to determine any point at which they have evidence which could lead to prosecutions or to charges or prosecutions. We must let the Met do their job. They're doing it carefully, they're doing it properly, but I can assure him and others that they will get to the truth and they will leave no stone unturned, and if there are charges and prosecutions to be made, then they will be.
Mr. Kevin Hollingray.
I attended a group, an understandably heated group discussion with local residents in the shadow of Grenfell Tower last evening. There seemed to be confusion about the coroner's recommendations in terms of retrofitting of sprinklers. I think the Vice Honourable Lady from Camberwell and Peckham is also unclear on this. The coroner recommended that we should encourage housing providers to retrofit, despite the fact that the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea didn't carry out this £8.7 million refurbishment. They didn't retrofit sprinklers. Does the Prime Minister agree that perhaps now is the time to provide incentives for local authorities to retrofit when they're carrying out these kind of refurbishments?
This is my honourable friend has rightly identified the recommendation that the coroner made, which was that encouragement be given to landlords to retrofit sprinklers. But I would just say to members of this House that the situation is not as easy as perhaps it would appear, in that in not all cases will it be the case that the retrofitting of sprinklers is actually going to be the thing that makes the difference. There's a whole variety of reasons why that may be the case. Some work has been undertaken on testing retrofitting of sprinklers into a number of tower blocks in different parts of the country. Because it isn't just, as I say, it isn't just a question of assuming that you can go in and do it and it's automatically going to work and do the job that is necessary. So it is an issue that has been looked at and continues to be looked at, but it needs to be done so carefully to ensure that any work that is done or is required is genuinely going to operate in a way that will help to keep people safe.
On break.
Speaker. Can I express my and my party's condolences to those affected by this disaster and our praise for the local community and emergency services who stepped up in the immediate aftermath when, unfortunately, the local and national authorities failed to do so. And can I thank the Prime Minister for the statement today and also setting up the public inquiry. Can the Prime Minister confirm when the work on the guidance that she referred to on building regs on fire safety will be completed? Can she confirm that as much focus will be put on private blocks, perhaps particularly those that were converted from office blocks into residential blocks, as is being put on local authority and housing association blocks? And can she confirm that the government will immediately ban the use of combustible materials to ensure that this tragedy cannot happen again?
On the last point, obviously the building regulations set out the materials that are compliant and materials that are non-compliant. And obviously, as we go through this process of looking at materials that have been used in various blocks, the question as to whether those indeed comply with the building regulations or not will be one of those that needs to be looked at. And of course, that will be an issue that will need to be looked at in relation to the public inquiry. Questions in relation to the guidance of the building regulations, that work is ongoing, and I would expect imminent. It's not just a question of producing something, but there does need to be consultation with various organisations in relation to that matter. But what we need to ensure is when the fire services, when the police have done their investigation, that any action that is necessary immediately as a result of the identification of the cause of the fire and the reasons why the fire took such hold, which is of course the issue that is of particular concern, then any action that is necessary is taken, and it will be taken.
Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
My right honourable friend might be interested to know that I spent about 3 hours on Monday quietly walking around the Grenfell Tower area talking to people. I met traumatised victims who didn't want to go into the centres to get help, so clearly people need to go out to them. They were angry that there was no clear housing policy as to when and where they were going to be rehoused. But above all, what I found was that there's an enormous amount of work being done by voluntary bodies, all sorts of bodies, but there is a clear lack of coordination as to how these bodies are to move forward together. So can I strongly support what my right honourable friend said this morning, that we should establish a high-level government task force that is able to go into a similar sort of disaster. They should be available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, to take over from the immediate Gold Command situation.
Yes. Can I thank my honourable friend for the work that he's done and the feedback that he has provided to ministers in relation to the conversations he had with residents and victims on the ground. He's absolutely right. The outreach workers, the point has been made to key workers that they need to go out to see people to make sure that people know what is available to them rather than just expecting people to come into the centre. And I can assure him that we are looking actively at what further resilience we can put into the system by establishing the sort of task force that he and I have both spoken about that will be available should, I mean, none of us want to see a circumstance like this happen again, but that we ensure that there is full resilience there where disasters take place.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. While many of the questions that those affected by this disaster will want answers to will have to await the outcome of the inquiry, there is one factual question that surely it is possible to answer now. Was cladding of the type used in Grenfell Tower compliant with the fire safety and building regulations applicable at the time when the refurbishment was undertaken, yes or no?
My understanding is the fire service have obviously, and the building research establishment have obviously, and the BRE were there on the scene very early to look at this issue. They have been identifying the cause of the fire and any contributory factors to the fire. They have been looking at the cause of the fire and any contributory factors to the fire. They are testing the cladding on the building, and they expect to make the results of this public in the next, I think, in the next 48 hours.
Anne-Marie Trevelyan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend confirm that those firefighters who attended this harrowing scene and their families will get the psychological support that they may well need in the months and years ahead? And would you commit to report back to the House on how this will be set up for them?
Yes, and my honourable friend has raised an important issue which the Leader of the Opposition actually also touched on, and I can confirm that we are ensuring that that support and counselling will be available, and there will be further updates to the House on the response to the Grenfell Tower fire, and that would be an issue to be included.
Yvette Cooper.
Further to the previous question, the cladding on the tower is a standard product that is available for sale. I don't understand why the Prime Minister can't tell us whether that product is compliant with building regulations for a tower that is this high. Why can she not tell us the answer? And can she also confirm that the Building Regulations Advisory Committee that should be looking at Part B of the building regulations on fire safety has not yet actually met to look at how they could be improved?
I will just add to the answer that I gave to the right honourable gentleman previously. And this is, I ask honourable members to remember that there is a criminal investigation taking place in relation to this matter. The testing, the testing of the cladding, the testing of the materials used is being undertaken, and a statement will be made by the police and the fire service within the next 48 hours. It's not...
James Cleverly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The London Resilience Forum has a number of multi-agency plans for things like mass shelter, mass fatalities, mass casualties. Can we confirm whether these plans were fully implemented? And can we ensure that what lessons we learn through the inquiry process are fed back into Resilience Forum, both in London and around the country, to ensure that those lessons are promptly implemented?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. And obviously, with his experience when he was on the London Assembly, he took a particular interest in matters relating to the London Fire Brigade and fire service matters. I can indeed confirm that we have already looked at this whole question of the resilience forums around the country. We will ensure that any lessons that are learnt from the Grenfell Tower fire are fed into those resilience teams and resilience forums, but we also need to ensure that those resilience forums around the country are as resilient as they need to be in terms of providing the support should any disaster happen. We've seen this issue in relation to other disasters like flooding. We need to ensure that at every local level the resilience forums are operating as they should.
Yona Onasanya.
Can the Prime Minister please confirm when the judge will be appointed? Also, with the comments that have been made by my colleagues on this side, I'd be grateful for your clarification as to whether you're advising us that you don't know whether the cladding was building regulation compliant, because the question that's being raised with the Prime Minister is whether that material was compliant, and are you advising that it needs to be tested before you can give us a reply to that question?
As I've said, the material is being tested. The results of those tests will be the information that the information that the fire and police are able to give publicly, they will give. This is part of the criminal investigation. In relation, honourable members may shake their heads, but can I just make this point? Honourable members want to ensure that if there are criminal charges to be brought, those charges are indeed brought. And we must therefore ensure that we give the police the opportunity to do the job that they undertake, and that nothing that we do prejudices that.
Chris Phil.
I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to the publication of an early interim report. After the Croydon tram crash last year, the Rail Accident Investigation Board published 2 interim reports within 3 months, which identified the immediate cause of the tram crash, so action could be taken. Could the Prime Minister assure the House that a similar approach will be taken in relation to this particular interim report?
thank my honourable friend for that, and it was very important that interim reports came out quickly in relation to the Croydon inquiry. And I can confirm that I fully expect the judge to bring out an interim report. Can I say to the honourable lady who asked the question previously, I'm sorry I didn't answer her first question about the judge. I would expect within the next few days to be able to announce the name of the judge. What I think we are very much want to ensure that when the judge takes charge of this inquiry, that people feel, as I said earlier, that they can have full confidence in the inquiry. And so we're taking steps to ensure that that's the case.
Yeah. Ms Saville-Roberts.
Yeah. Sympathies are not enough, but on behalf of my party, I offer them to all who have suffered, and I'd also express my gratitude to emergency services officers who showed the dedication of heroes in unimaginable conditions. Criminal investigations are only to be expected, but penalising individuals is partial retribution. Those in government should search their souls, and will the Prime Minister commit to ensure that in future policy, legislation and resources, a disaster of this magnitude can never happen again in a 21st century first world country?
Can I first of all congratulate the honourable lady on her appointment as leader of the Plaid Cymru members in this House, and can I assure her that we are doing everything that we can, and obviously the inquiry will play an important part in it, in its identification of action that needs to be taken to ensure that a disaster like this can never happen again.
Richard Drax.
Right honourable friend confirm that if the cladding is found to be illegal and other research comes back that other towers have been similarly clad, that the public inquiry will extend its remit to look at investigations into all towers that are similarly clad with illegal cladding, if indeed it is illegal.
What I would say to my honourable friend is that if illegal activity has taken place, then that is a matter for the police and for the part of the criminal investigation that the police will be undertaking. Of course, the inquiry will... it's not just a question of what the inquiry does, it's a question of what we're doing now in relation to other tower blocks. That's why we are encouraging local authorities, housing associations and indeed private landlords to send in their material for testing.
Angela Eagle.
Mr Speaker, as the leader of a party which is responsible for 7 years of austerity, which has cut 56% of the cash available to my local authority in the last 7 years, and a leader of a party that has spent its time talking about regulation as a bad thing, is she now going to apologise to the country for the state of local government when the richest borough in London cannot afford to couldn't cope with this emergency, because at the same time as they were giving money back to their council taxpayers?
I say to the honourable lady, we are currently dealing with the aftermath of a terrible disaster that has led to people losing their lives and others losing their homes and everything that they owned. We are ensuring that we are putting the steps in place. I recognise, as I've said, that initially the response wasn't good enough. That's why we've stepped up that response. That's why I say I didn't respond to the right honourable lady, the member for Camberwell and Peckham, but I have indeed been chairing, as I said in my statement, the COBRA meetings myself. That's why we have been putting extra resource in to ensure that that response is suitable. This will be an issue of looking at the regulations. As I said, my understanding is these regulations are ones that were established in 2006. We will be looking at those regulations. The inquiry will look at those regulations. They will look at how they were applied. They will look at the actions of the local authority. I'm sure that they will look at the issues that have been raised about the residents' complaints in advance of this disaster about the tenant management organisation, and they will get to the bottom of who is responsible.
Order. As befits the occasion, these are thoughtful and solemn exchanges, but I must advise the House that progress thus far has been very slow. I am keen to try to accommodate the extent of the interest, and therefore I appeal to colleagues now to confine themselves to pithy, short, single-sentence questions, of which the honourable gentleman, the member for North East Somerset, is a notable exponent. Mr Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. At the end of her compassionate and comprehensive statement,
My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, said that we had to think about the people living very different lives from ourselves. As I'm sure she knows, in opinion surveys going back over decades, people never said they wanted to live in tower blocks. And can we change public policy so that tower blocks can become a thing of the past?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that question. There are many people who do not wish to live in tower blocks. There are some people who are perfectly comfortable living in tower blocks. What we have to look at, though, is the approach that is taken to social housing. I think that is one of the lessons that comes from this disaster.
To be an outbreak of sibling rivalry, so I must now call Maria Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister confirmed in her statement that testing arrangements have discovered combustible cladding on some tower blocks in other parts of the country. Given that people who are living in those tower blocks are going to fear, perhaps more than others, the consequences of that discovery, what steps can she take to make sure that the landlords and local authorities where these tower blocks exist can swiftly deal with the consequences of that discovery?
Well, that work is already being undertaken. As soon as we identify, first of all, the testing work has been undertaken by local authorities, housing associations, and we encourage private landlords to do it too, of their blocks to ensure the fire safety. We encourage everybody to send in samples so that we can undertake this checking, lab testing. Local authorities are immediately informed if the material is combustible. They are then looking with their local fire services at ensuring the safety of those buildings. That will be done in a number of ways. But of course, there is a responsibility to ensure that people are housed safely, and the government is working with local authorities to ensure that.
Jenkins.
Commend my right honourable friend's statement and the extraordinary degree of personal responsibility she is taking in this response. Has she and her officials had the opportunity to look at reports by the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee and its predecessor committee under Dr Tony Wright, which have repeatedly recommended that the House of Commons should have more of a role in the setting up of such inquiries? And would you consider asking the House to establish a special select committee very quickly to look at the terms of reference, to give a pre-appointment hearing of the chair of the inquiry, and to set the budget and set the timetable and make sure that this public inquiry does have cross-party and public confidence in the way that so many public inquiries have failed to do?
My right honourable friend raises an important issue about inquiries, and of course we always look carefully at the reports of the PAC and indeed its predecessor committee. I think what is important in relation to this inquiry is that we do get it up and running with appropriate speed, and the most important thing to me is that the residents affected will have confidence in the inquiry. I think the key thing we need to do is to ensure that it is the residents who can feel that this inquiry is genuinely going to get to the truth for them.
Aaron Buck.
Still waiting to hear the Prime Minister say that she will underwrite the costs to local authorities of inspection and urgent remedial action, given the cuts of up to 1.5% on local authority budgets and housing providers being required to implement a rent cut which has squeezed their budgets. We cannot have a postcode lottery in terms of safety provision, and that needs a commitment now from the government to underwrite it. Will she do that today, yes or no?
We are providing the testing facilities to the local authorities. We are working with local authorities to identify their needs and their requirements and the response that they need to take, and work with them to ensure that they can respond in the way that is necessary.
Robert Courts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister please confirm that residents will be housed as close as possible to where they lived to ensure that they are close to friends, family and support networks?
Yes, I can give that reassurance. It's being close to friends and family, but also it's important for children in families to be able to go to their local schools.
Mahalia.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister talked about looking forward to the future and about those who are far removed in their lifestyles from those that many here in Westminster enjoy. This is the reality in my constituency, with overcrowding, 2 families living in many homes, homelessness the worst it's ever been. Will she now live true to her word and take a personal lead in taking plans forward to make sure we're delivering not just more housing, but more really affordable housing for the people who need it?
Prime Minister.
And we published, my right honourable friend, the Community Secretary, published proposals in relation to housing before the general election. We want to ensure there are more affordable homes, there are more houses being built, and we have put putting £500 million into the issue of dealing with homelessness.
Rebecca Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I thank the Prime Minister for her detailed and compassionate statement that she's given us this morning. But I wonder if she would agree that although there are obviously legitimate questions surrounding the Grenfell tragedy, and absolutely rightly they must be asked, we should exercise all caution in attributing blame or condemnation before we know the facts. And as a former journalist, I feel really strongly about this. Scaremongering doesn't help anybody. Getting to the bottom of things does.
Well, my honourable friend is right. What is important is that the evidence is identified, that the issue is properly considered, everybody is able to give their views and their evidence into the inquiry, and that is able to get to the truth and to find the result and to find out what happened. Obviously, the fire services and the police are looking at the immediate cause of the fire and will make public any statements that in relation to that they are able to, but the inquiry will get to the truth, and it's important that we actually allow the inquiry to identify responsibility.
Richard Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Leeds City Council have responded swiftly, communicating with tenants and residents in all 116 blocks, testing the cladding, none of which uses the same as what was used in Kensington. But what we now need to know, and following on from the question from my honourable friend, the member for Westminster North, is that whatever recommendations are made on sprinklers, on cladding, on fire alarms and other remedial work, that it will be central government that is providing the funds to ensure that tenants and residents in all of those thousands of tower blocks across the country are safe.
I thought I've responded on a number of questions on this. The government is working with local authorities. We will ensure that any essential works that are necessary in terms of remedial action for safety of these blocks in relation to fire are taken. We will work with local authorities to identify how that... We will identify... There will be different circumstances in different local authorities. We will ensure that the work can be undertaken.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend the Prime Minister for her statement and for talking about the public inquiry. From my experience of having had a public inquiry for 2.5 years in my constituency, it is absolutely vital that it is thorough, but that it is also as swift as possible. Can I urge that whomsoever is appointed talks with people like Sir Robert Francis, who chaired the public inquiry in my constituency, to find out from his experience how that can best be achieved.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I will certainly pass that on, but I absolutely agree with him. It's important that this is done as quickly as possible.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Prime Minister's statement that the Government will pay for legal representation for those affected by this fire at the inquiry? But can I ask her to confirm that this means that both victims and tenants' groups will be given public funding for independent and separate legal representation, sufficient to enable them to have a voice equal to that of local and national government and the private management company? I ask this question because I understand that the Tenants Association were not allowed legal representation in the Lacanau House fire inquiry.
This is, I say to the Honourable Lady that it's one of the experiences that came out of the Hillsborough inquiry was the importance of ensuring that those who were affected had appropriate legal representation, and the government did fund that legal representation to enable them to have the strength of voice that they needed in that inquiry. Of course, as she will be aware, how the inquiry is conducted and the witnesses who are called and the representations that will be received there will be an element of the judge actually deciding how he wants to conduct that inquiry. But for those who require legal representation, we will be funding that by the government, and I've not set any limits in relation to the types of body or the individuals who that would be.
Tom Pursglove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend was absolutely right to highlight the incredible work of the brave firefighters who attended the scene in the immediate aftermath of this incident. But will she not only ensure that they are properly recognised for those Herculean efforts, but also that any welfare needs arising are met immediately?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and support is being given to the firefighters and indeed police and others who attended the scene to ensure, because they also obviously potentially suffer from trauma as a result of what they've seen, and that support will be available.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister, in concluding her statement, said that we should resolve never to forget these people. I would like to ask her who she thinks forgot these people. Was it the former Chancellor of the Exchequer who defunded local authorities, including my own, still struggling with the consequences of the New Ferry explosion? Was it former ministers who ignored pleas from this House on fire safety? Or is it her who's seen other people in Britain as these people rather than our friends and our neighbours?
I think the best response I can give to the Honourable Lady on that matter is to refer her to the remarks that I made when I became Prime Minister on the steps of Downing Street about a country that works for everyone.
Hugh Merriman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I note in the Prime Minister's statement that all social landlords have been instructed to carry out additional fire safety checks, but private landlords have just been given advice that they can take up an option of the same facility. Can we ensure that the inquiry looks at both private and social tower blocks, because all citizens should be equal when it comes to safety and assurance?
Well, I'm sure that the inquiry obviously will focus on what happened at Grenfell Tower, but any implications that come out of that inquiry may very well actually affect others, not just social landlords, but obviously private landlords as well.
Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's already been asked this question several times and failed to answer, so I'm going to give her the opportunity again. Will the government fully commit to meet the cost for proper and appropriate safety checks, to fully fund the recommendations and schemes for retrofit of sprinklers and any other associated costs?
I have answered it. I have made it clear. I've made it clear that where work is necessary, resources will be available to ensure that that work can be undertaken. But it's for the government to work with the local authorities to ensure that that takes place.
Alex Chalk.
Speaker, the families of the victims are entitled to the truth, not speculation, not conjecture, but the truth based on evidence. So my right honourable friend is absolutely right to set up the public inquiry. But can we ensure that an early date is agreed for publication of an interim report? On the facts of this case, perhaps more than any other, justice delayed is justice denied.
Minister.
I would hope and expect that the judge, obviously the individual will be independent, but I would expect that the judge, when appointed, would indicate publicly when they would expect to be able to bring an interim report out, so that people will have that confidence.
Ms. Randy Slaughter.
Speaker, will the Prime Minister confirm that the 68 flats to be allocated to the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire on the Berkeley Homes Kensington Road development are already designated as social housing? What we need, particularly in places like West London, where social housing is the only affordable housing for many, is large investment in new affordable housing, not rearranging the same pot. And on these benches, we were very sceptical about her conversion to social housing until she starts providing that housing and not talking about it.
The important point about the Berkeley's home development is that it is being, if you like, ring-fenced for people who've been affected by Grenfell Tower. That's the significance of this. It is available, and it will be available purely for people who have come from, who've been displaced and lost their homes as a result of this tragedy.
Waitley.
Mr. Speaker, we've heard that residents of Grenfell Tower had spoken up about their fears but not been listened to. Like so many of our constituents on whose behalf we as MPs frequently write to organisations asking for them to be given a fair hearing, and despite the dedication of many thousands of staff. Could I ask my right honourable friend to look at the management systems and culture of organisations that serve the public, to work out what needs to change, to make sure that every citizen of this country, whoever they are, wherever they are not just heard but listened to?
My honourable friend raises an important point in relation to this issue. It is indeed, and we need to ensure that organisations who have a responsibility to the public do indeed listen to the public, as my honourable friend said. In relation to looking ahead for any future disasters that should take place, that's why I'm looking at this concept of the independent public advocate, somebody who can make sure that answers come, that not just that people get the support that they need, but that they get the answers that they need.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, many have paid tribute to the fire
rescue workers who put their lives in danger and the trauma that they may still feel from that. I would like, as a surgeon of over 30 years, to highlight that NHS staff will also be traumatised, because there is nothing more horrific than dealing with the victims of burns. In the autumn statement of 2015, the former Chancellor identified £800 million that should be taken from the new housing bonus scheme to make up the shortfall in social care. Will the current Chancellor now reverse that?
The edition of the Honourable Lady's inquiry was equalled only by its length, and we need to be shorter from now on. Prime Minister.
Yes. Well, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right. As I said, I visited one of the hospitals which had taken in victims, and obviously those NHS staff did a wonderful job as well. And of course, what we've seen here in London is NHS staff not only dealing with the Grenfell Tower disaster, but also dealing with the terrorist attacks that have taken place. And as she said, it is those NHS staff deserve support, as do others in the emergency services that have been referred to earlier.
Nigel Huddleston.
Speaker, I speak as a representative of an area of the country that has no tower blocks, but the overwhelming wish of my constituents is for us to have timely implementation of any recommendations that come out of a public inquiry in a non-partisan manner. And recognising that this may come at a considerable cost to the public purse, is the Prime Minister aware that across the country that is the will of many people and that is acceptable?
Yes, and it is absolutely the case that any recommendations that come out of this public inquiry, because they will be recommendations about keeping people safe, and action will be taken on those recommendations.
Order. I'm keen to accommodate the remaining interest, but it must be pithily conveyed. Annalisa Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a very quick question. Will the one in, two out approach to the regulatory so-called burden now be abandoned for fire safety?
I would say to the Honourable Lady that the issue of regulations, we've always taken the issue of regulations in relation to safety very, very seriously indeed. And she might know that when I was Home Secretary, I was very clear that it's not the case that all regulation is bad regulation. There is good regulation which we need to ensure we get right, and one of the issues from the public inquiry will be asking that very question about fire regulation.
I congratulate the Honourable Lady on her succinctness. It's clear that she's now volunteered to author the textbook for distribution to colleagues. Mr. Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Prime Minister will share my view that it seems almost inconceivable an organisation spent £8.7 million refurbishing a tower block and didn't include inflammable cladding and a sprinkler system. Can she confirm that when we have the outcome for the public inquiry, there will be an opportunity to debate it on the floor of this House and time made available for any necessary legislation as well?
Well, yes, I'm happy to indicate that I think it would be appropriate for this House to have an opportunity to debate the outcome of the public inquiry, and to look at those issues.
We will have to wrap up at 10 past, so we'll do what we can between now and then. Rashanara Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Residents of Grenfell Tower warned the housing provider of the dangers and that it would take a fire in a tower block for notice to be taken. Can I ask the Prime Minister to look at the Localism Act once again, which currently requires residents to give it 8 weeks before they can make a complaint to the Ombudsman for this to be taken up through their Members of Parliament?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for raising an issue which hadn't been raised with me before. I will look at the Localism Act. I think there are reasons why that period of time was put into the Act, but she's right that the issue of the response of the tenant management organisation is one of the ones that it has been raised, and is one of the ones that needs to be looked at as the inquiry looks at the reasons for this.
John Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the results of the individual examinations to which she has referred over this issue be produced as they become available, or will they all be subjected to the public examination? And if it's the former, could we have a timetable for that, please?
I assume my honourable friend is talking about the tests on the cladding. Yes. Yes. Certainly as regards the test on the cladding, as soon as the result is available and the test can be done within hours of the samples being received, then the local authorities or housing association, or should they come from private landlords, they will immediately be informed as to the results of those tests.
A single sentence and a short one. Jack Dramey.
Mr Speaker, fire sprinklers save lives. Can I correct the Prime Minister? Actually, the inquest recommended that the department issue guidance to all providers of high-rise blocks that they should retrofit sprinklers. Can I ask the Prime Minister this? There's 213 blocks with 10,000 households in Birmingham. Will she agree now to act on the advice that was given 4 years ago, retrofit sprinklers and pay for it, government to pay for it?
Can I simply point out to the honourable gentleman that the recommendation was that the Department encourage providers of housing in high-rise residential buildings containing multiple domestic premises to consider the retrofitting of sprinkler systems.
Vicky Ford.
Could I ask my right honourable friend, will the inquiry also look at the safety of tall buildings in which people work, as well as those in which people live?
Yes, I think it's important that this inquiry, when it looks at the implications of the fire, actually assesses those for all tall buildings rather than just for those in which people live. And indeed, we are ensuring that we are looking at other tall buildings that may have been clad in a similar way, which may not be residential properties, but which may be used for other purposes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister please tell us why she will not choose to show leadership and require all councils to retrofit the flats and provide the resources?
I have made the point earlier that what we need to ensure in any accommodation that is provided by local authorities or housing associations is that that accommodation is safe. People are making assumptions about the work that needs to be done to ensure that. What needs to happen on the ground is the local authority or the housing association, the landlord, working with the fire and rescue service to ensure that they can provide that safety.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister considers her suggestion of a civil disaster task force, will she bear in mind one of the lessons of the severe Gloucestershire floods of 2007, which was a single leader at Gold Command responsible for coordinating all the different groups and controlling the media and information?
I thank my honourable friend. We will indeed consider that, and indeed it is putting that in place here with John Barradell as Gold Command that I think has helped to move things forward and ensure the response has improved.
Clive Efford.
Where an independent fire safety review of a block of flats recommends retrofitting sprinklers or major refurbishment, will the government fund it?
Well, the honourable gentleman's question seemed to talk about any blocks of flats in the country, whether they be in private or public sector ownership. What we are doing is making sure, first of all, that the fire service and landlords ensure the safety, local authorities and housing associations assess what is needed for the safety of those properties, and where action is needed and work is needed, the government will work with those landlords to ensure that that can be done.
Chris Williamson.
The Prime Minister concluded her statement by saying that it was the government's job to show it's listening. So will she listen to the experts in the Fire Brigade Union and reverse the cuts to the Fire and Rescue Service and retrofit sprinklers in all high-rise residential accommodation?
As I've already said in relation to the issue of sprinklers, some tests on retrofitting have been undertaken across the country, but it isn't as simple as saying that if you simply retrofit sprinklers, then that's the one thing that you need to do. There are a variety of ways in which action needs to be taken in blocks, and what needs to happen is that the experts do assess that for every block.
David Perkins.
Thank you. The Community Secretary has demanded that the Chief Executive of Kensington resign. Should Councillor Paget Brown resign?
Yes. That is a matter that will be considered by the appropriate group on Kensington and Chelsea Council.
Karen McCarthy.
Mr. Speaker, if Bristol Council comes to the conclusion that essential work is needed on its tower blocks, will the government fund that? And if so, how soon will we get the money?
If, in conjunction with the Fire and Rescue Service, the decision is made that work needs to be done on those tower blocks, then there will then be a discussion between the authority and the Department of Communities and Local Government about how that work can be undertaken and about the provision of resources for that work.
Johnson.
I know the Prime Minister believes that politicians should be accountable for their actions or their inactions. So on that basis, has she told the leader of Kensington and Chelsea Council that he should go because of the appalling way this tragedy has been handled?
I have had a conversation with the leader of Kensington and Chelsea Council. What I told him was that he needed to ensure that residents and victims and survivors of this terrible disaster were being given the help and support that they needed. We have now put more help and support in to ensure that that is happening on the ground.
Alan Brown.
Mr Speaker, in terms of paying more attention to social housing going forward, will the Prime Minister pledge to review the right to buy discount policy? The implicit message from government that renting is not aspirational enough, how the one-to-one replacement process is managed to allow greater council house building.
To the honourable gentleman, if he looks at the housing white paper that we produced earlier, the government produced earlier this year, he will see that we were very clear that we expect there to be a diversity of ways in which people will be in their homes. Some will wish to own their homes, some will wish to rent their homes, some will wish to have rent-to-buy schemes, some will wish shared ownership schemes. What I want to see is a diversity that suits people and their circumstances.
Greenwood.
Both of the fire stations in my constituency are closing as a direct result of government cuts. So will the government now take action and increase funding to Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service?
What is happening across the country is fire services are ensuring that they have the appropriate response to the fires that they are dealing with. What was important here in relation to the Grenfell Tower fire is it was urban search and rescue as well as the London Fire Brigade were available, the resources were there, and they were able to take the action that they took.
A short sentence, Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I've heard a lot of the use of the word encouragement today. In my experience, the word encouragement is not necessarily useful when we're talking about something of this magnitude and the tragedy. Markets don't work with encouragement, they work with regulation. Could I suggest that there's been an explosion in the number of student properties built in recent years in the private sector, and that it's incumbent on the government to actually make it mandatory for not just the public sector, but also the private sector to use their facilities and test all these properties?
Well, there are regulations in place in relation to the fire safety regulations and building regulations in place. Landlords have a responsibility for ensuring the safety of their properties. We are ensuring that facilities are available to those. We are doing that free of charge. And I say once again, local authorities and housing associations are indeed sending in samples, and I would encourage them to do so, and others to do so as well. And as I said, the facilities for this checking are available to the devolved administrations as well.
Nick Thomas-Simmons.
Mr Speaker, can the Prime Minister assure me that she will work with the devolved administrations on the lesson learning process, including with the Welsh Government, which has announced an expert group to do just that in recent days?
We are already talking to the devolved administrations on the lessons of anything that is coming out so far, and will continue to do so.
Kate Green.
It's already become apparent that landlords do not always know who occupies their properties and the vulnerabilities of certain tenants. Will the Prime Minister ensure that we investigate opportunities for data sharing between, for example, local authorities, social services, departments, schools and registered social landlords?
Well, the Honourable Lady has raised an interesting issue about ensuring, and I think this is sometimes at the heart of ensuring, that people who are interacting with various government departments, that actually the service that the government gives to them is one that is focused on their needs and identifies their particular needs. And I will consider the issue she raises about data sharing.
Pascal.
Cuts have consequences. According to Home Office figures, the number of checks has fallen by 25%. These are the home fire safety checks since 2010. Will the Prime Minister now give the service the funding it needs to carry out 100% of the checks that are required?
The Fire and Rescue Service do obviously conduct checks. They do that in relation to residential properties of these sorts of tower blocks owned by local authorities and housing associations. They do so in conjunction with those landlords, and some of those checks will be conducted by landlords themselves.
Liz McInnes.
Will the Prime Minister meet urgently with the Fire and Rescue Service to discuss the advice given to residents of tower blocks, given that, sadly, it would seem the advice given to the residents of Grenfell Tower to stay in their flats may have been erroneous?
The Fire and Rescue Service have representation at the meetings that I have been chairing in relation to the response to Grenfell Tower. The issue of the advice that has been given to residents has been raised with them. Obviously, this is a matter that will need reflection and consideration, and I would expect it also to be one that the inquiry will look at.
Mr Speaker, can I ask an assessment is carried out as part of the inquiry into the capacity of the fire service to respond to incidents such as this, particularly with reference to crewing and high-reach appliances?
The fire service in this instance was able to respond to this, but of course when the inquiry looks at these issues I would expect that to be one that they would consider.
Mr Shannon, 15 seconds maximum. Mr Shannon.
There's 32 high-rise tower blocks in Northern Ireland where safety checks will be carried out. Can I ask the Prime Minister, when it comes to the lessons learned and the suggestions and the recommendations that the Northern Ireland Assembly and the Northern Ireland Housing Executive will be made aware of those?
We will indeed. It allows me to say to the honourable gentleman that I hope that the Northern Ireland Assembly and the Northern Ireland Executive will be formed such that they are in a position for us to give them that information.
Thank the Prime Minister very warmly for her time this morning and all colleagues for their spirited cooperation on this very important and grave occasion. Order. Statement. The Secretary of State for the Home Department, Secretary Amber Rudd.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I would like to make a statement about the terrorist attacks we have seen since Parliament last sat. There has been no summer like it. When we rose 7 weeks ago, we left this House in the wake of the worst terrorist attack our country had seen in over a decade, with Khalid Massoud trying to strike at the heart of our democracy. He was foiled that day by one of our brave police officers, but tragically, it has proved to be the first of many attempts to bring terror and hate to our streets. 2 months later, a cowardly and devastating attack in Manchester left 22 people dead and 59 injured after a suicide bomber targeted children at a concert in the Manchester Arena. On the 3rd of June, a van was deliberately driven into pedestrians on London Bridge before 3 men got out of the vehicle and began stabbing people in nearby Borough Market. 8 people were killed and 48 injured. And then on Monday, almost exactly 1 year after Joe Cox was brutally murdered in Birstall, we woke to the news of the return of far-right terror when a man viciously drove into a group of Muslim worshippers in North London. 1 man who had fallen ill before the attack died, and 9 others were treated in hospital. Westminster, the Manchester Arena, London Bridge, and now Finsbury Park. 36 innocent people dead and over 150 hospitalised. A tragic loss of innocent life. Last week, I met a mother and father who had lost their daughter in the vicious attacks on London Bridge. She'd been stabbed while out celebrating her new job with a friend in Borough Market. Just under 2 weeks before, she planned to be at the arena in Manchester, where Salman Abedi committed his heinous crimes, but she decided not to use her ticket. She had come to London to enjoy a wonderful trip away, a once-in-a-lifetime experience, but instead it was the last trip she ever made. I know everyone in this House will want to join me in expressing our sorrow for the pain her family will be feeling, and all those families who have lost loved ones, as well as passing on our thoughts and prayers for those victims who are still trying to recover from the trauma and tragedy of these events. I also know that the House will want to join me in acknowledging the incredible efforts of our emergency services during this difficult period. The events of recent months serve to remind us of the bravery, professionalism, and above all, incredible sacrifice made by those who work to keep us safe. As Home Secretary, there is nothing more saddening than standing before Parliament to deliver a statement like this. These acts of terrorism represent the very worst of humanity. They seek to spread fear, intolerance, hate. Countering this threat has always been a crucial part of the work of this government. That's why we have introduced measures to disrupt foreign fighters, and that's why we have passed the Investigatory Powers Act, which gives the police and intelligence service more powers and tools that they need to keep the public safe. And that's why, just 7 weeks ago, we legislated to strengthen our response to terrorist financing with the Criminal Finances Act. We have also protected overall police funding in real terms since 2015, increased counter-terrorism budgets, and funded an uplift in armed police officers. We are now in the process of recruiting over 1,900 additional security and intelligence staff. The Channel programme, which offers voluntary, tailored programmes of support to people assessed at being at risk of radicalisation, has supported over 1,000 at-risk individuals since 2012. And following referrals from the Counter-Terrorism Internet Referral Unit, social media providers have removed 270,000 pieces of illegal terrorist material since February 2010. But we are entering a new phase of global terrorism, and many of the challenges that we face are unprecedented. We now believe we are experiencing a new trend in the threat we face. Between June 2013 and the Westminster Bridge attack in March this year, the security services foiled 13 plots linked to or inspired by Islamist extremists. But since just then, we have seen 5 plots prevented, as well as 3 such Islamist extremist plots succeeding, and the appalling attack, of course, on Finsbury Park earlier this week. So we must do more. We must do more to defeat ideologies of hatred by turning people's minds away from violence and towards pluralistic British values. We must make sure that these ideologies are not able to flourish in the first place. We must do more to force tech companies to take down terror-related content from their platforms. And we must also do more to identify, challenge and stamp out the extremism that lurks in our communities. That is why we'll be setting up a commission for countering extremism. For just as the Labour government in the 1970s set us on a course to tackling racial inequality in this country by setting up the Commission for Racial Equality, we need and must do more to tackle these extremists who seek to radicalise and weaponise young people in Britain today. Doing more also means asking difficult questions about what has gone wrong. In light of the terrorist attacks in London and Manchester, Britain's counter-terrorism strategy will be reviewed to make sure that the police and the security services have what they need to keep us safe. In addition to this, there will be a review of the handling of recent terror attacks to look at whether lessons can be learned about our approach. I'm pleased to announce that David Anderson, former independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, will be overseeing it. Mr. Speaker, what we have witnessed in Manchester and in London are the depraved actions of murderers intent to tear our country apart. But each act of hate has been met by overwhelming defiance. In Borough Market recently, I saw stallholders dishing out olives into plastic pots, shoppers searching for delicious treats, and tourists flicking through guidebooks in the shadow of the Shard. Rather than being divided by recent violence, people seemed even closer together. We should follow that example of the traders and shoppers of Borough Market. What terrorists want is for us to fear and to turn in on one another. But we will never give terrorists what they want. We will stand together and we will make the point that terrorists will never win, that our values, our country, our unity will prevail. I commend the statement to the House.
Diane Abbott.
On this side of the House, we are grateful to the Home Secretary for her statement, and we would like to offer our condolences to all the victims and their families of the Westminster, Manchester, London Bridge and Borough Market attacks, and most recently Finsbury Park. 36 innocent people dead, 150 people hospitalised, too many families where children or parents will never come home, and too many people, particularly children, who have seen sights which they may never be able to unsee, and whole communities traumatised. We also, on this side of the House, want to commend all of the emergency services, including police, fire, British Transport Police and NHS staff, for their swift actions, running towards danger, coming in off shift, which undoubtedly prevented worse injuries and saved lives. And I would just like to say a word about the Imam at the Finsbury Park Mosque. This was an Imam who put himself at risk to protect and defend the alleged assailant who had driven over so many people outside the mosque. And I believe that this Imam exemplifies the best of the values of Islam in relation to peace and justice, but also the best of British values. I'd also like to say about the community around the Finsbury Park Mosque. I was there this week, and I met people of all faiths, Christian leaders, Jewish leaders, including my constituents, Rabbi Gluck and Rabbi Pinter, and of course, Muslim leaders, working together to heal the community and take the community forward. And I believe the way that multi-faith and inter-community cooperation is working in practice in that area of London shows us the way forward in the end, in the long run, in contesting the ideology of fear and violence and terror. The variety of these attacks and their different type and varied backgrounds of perpetrators reveal that we face multiple threats. No single type of person and no single community is the sole source of these attacks. We all face these attacks, and we must all face them together. Of course, the blame for these attacks lies solely with the perpetrators and any murderous supporters and enablers they may have. But it is reasonable for this House to say that the role of government is to secure the safety of our citizens, and it is reasonable for the House to ask, has everything been done that could reasonably have been done? I noted the actions the government has taken in the Home Secretary's statement, and largely on this side of the House we support them. But we would warn against an emphasis on more legislation rather than looking at the issue of resources. We will look at all legislative proposals that the government brings forward on their merits, but we believe that resources is at the heart of this, not just new legislation. And in that view, we are supported by Max Hill, the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation. His objective view is that current powers are sufficient. He told the BBC after the Prime Minister's speech calling for more powers, I quote, "My view, coming into the scrutiny, which we are told the Prime Minister wants to conduct, is that we do have the appropriate laws in place. And essentially, the police and security services and those whose job it is to keep us safe do have the powers at their disposal." But he did add there was a case for increased use of T-pins. But on the question of resources, it is one thing to talk about specialist policing and security resources, but we cannot overstate on this side of the House the importance of neighbourhood policing. It is that neighbourhood engagement at all levels, often in what might seem simple ways, that builds the confidence in communities of officialdom and the government and encourages people to come forward with the information which may help us to stop future terrorist activity happening. And we have said, and we continue to say, it was wrong that since 2010 we have lost 20,000 in police numbers. And we oppose further cuts to the police budgets that are now in the pipeline. And you know, the Home Secretary keeps saying that this government has protected police budgets. I have to tell the Home Secretary that there are no policing stakeholders, including the Police Federation, that supports her in saying police budgets and police resources have not been hit. Will the Home Secretary now, when we're being told austerity must end, commit to halting these cuts? Or does austerity still apply to our safety? Senior retired officers have said the police cuts have gone too far. The Home Secretary will have heard, like myself, that Mark Rowley, the Assistant Commissioner at the Metropolitan Police, has written to you saying in terms that counter-terrorism is not able to operate effectively because of demands in other areas of policing, and if these resources were diverted to counter-terrorism, other areas of policing would suffer. What Mark Rowley is saying is that cuts have consequences, and your cuts run the risk of putting us all in danger. And our understanding on this side is you're going to cut again.
Order. Can I just, at this very early stage of the Parliament, say something that I think is quite important for future reference? There are time limits for questioning on statements, and in the last Parliament they were very substantially disregarded, and that cannot happen in this Parliament because it's not fair to backbenchers. That's the first point. And the second point, and forgive me because the Honourable Lady is extraordinarily articulate and very experienced, it's a point that, forgive me, opposition spokespersons frequently just don't seem to understand. In responding to a statement, we're not looking for, the Chair is not expecting to hear a counter-statement. What the Chair is looking to hear, as provided for in our procedures, is a very, very brief response, followed by a series of questions. And that is the character of the response. Now, on this occasion, I will allow the Honourable Lady to finish, but I hope she'll be sensitive to quite a widespread feeling in the House that she is approaching her peroration. But thereafter, we must observe these limits, and if they're not observed, very regretfully, I will have to ask the spokesperson concerned to resume his or her seat. The Shadow Home Secretary, Diane Abbott.
So can I ask, does the Home Secretary accept that resources are as important as new institutions and new legislation? We welcome the measures to get internet companies to block and take down content promoting terrorism. But does the Home Secretary accept the debate around the PREVENT programme and the need for a review and the need to reframe it as just not relating to the Muslim community but also to far-right terrorism? We would say on this side of the House that these are issues on which there's considerable unity in the country as a whole. And we believe that the country as a whole wants to know that we will not play into the terrorist hands by stoking divisions, demonising communities, or rescinding our hard-won freedoms under the law.
Well, I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her comments and the constructive way in which she's approaching this. And from our part, we look forward to working with her to make sure that we do have a constructive, united approach to this enemy that is trying to attack us. She asked particularly about new legislation. She is right that Max Hill has said that he doesn't see the need for new legislation, but he's also said he does see the need for a review of the sentences. So we will certainly be looking at whether we can have tougher sentences. In terms of new potential legislation and an approach, I would ask her just to hold fire for now on concluding that to be the case until we have done this review. I think the critical element that we have to do over the next few months is the review of why so many terror attacks took place, looking backwards, and for that we will have this independent assurance in the form of David Anderson, and also review looking ahead to what else we can do. As I have said in my earlier statement, we feel we have entered a new phase. It may mean that we need new legislation, but we're not going to rush to do that based on the attacks. We're going to look at doing that depending on what we find out from these reviews. And I would ask her to keep an open mind to that, depending on what conclusions are reached by these reviews. In terms of resources, I bow to no one in my respect for the work that the police do and the work particularly the counter-terrorism police have done over the past few months. And we all recognise the enormous extra work and effort that has gone into making sure that they follow up on these attacks and keep us safe. We have protected the police budget from 2015. There has been a lot of scaremongering about changes to the budget. I can repeat here in the House that that budget will be protected, and we will make sure that we always give the security services and the police, who do such work to keep us safe, the resources that they need.
Mr. Dominic Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I greatly welcome my right honourable friend's statement. There were just 2 to 3 points I just wanted to raise with her. The first is I particularly welcome that the sentencing guidelines will be reviewed. I think that that is something which ought to happen because of the evidence that individuals who are certainly doing acts preparatory to terrorism may be receiving sentences which are insufficient, although clearly they also need to be proportionate. The second issue concerns the response and how our security services are working to deal with this threat. She will be aware that, and correctly, that in fact this is an area where the government has made very considerable investment. There has been a great enhancement in the money spent and in the numbers of officers available. Equally, it's right that because of the classified nature of the work they do, some of the details can't be given to this House. That does rather emphasise to me that one of the problems we've had over the last 3.5 months is that in reality we have not had an Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament able to provide the sort of scrutiny which I think might be helpful to honourable members in understanding what has been going on and what should be done in future and whether there are any improvements that can be made. And perhaps therefore I could gently urge her to make representations to my right honourable friend the Prime Minister that this perhaps should be given a priority.
Well, I thank the right honourable member for my right honourable friend, the member for Beaconsfield, for his comments, and I know, of course, that he is so well experienced in this, having been the chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee. And it is a very good point, and I will follow up on his suggestion that we should get that committee established as soon as possible, so that we can give the House the confidence that it is members across both chambers who are now going to be looking at this and providing the assurance that they want.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by adding the voice of the Scottish National Party to those who condemn these terrible attacks, and also our sincere condolences to the families and friends of the dead, and our best wishes for a full recovery to those injured. May I also welcome the Home Secretary back to her place and say that I look forward to working with her on this and other important issues. Mr. Speaker, the Finsbury Park attack reminds us that terrorism is a threat to all communities in the United Kingdom, and therefore it's important that measures to tackle counter-extremism must never segregate or stigmatise communities within the UK. I've got 3 questions for the Home Secretary. Firstly, I'm concerned that the Government's plans to establish a commission, whilst commendable, without legislation risk bypassing parliamentary scrutiny of the need for legal certainty on the definition of terms such as extremism and British values. How is she going to ensure that Parliament gets to scrutinise these matters? Secondly, in order to fight terrorism effectively, we in the SNP believe that we can use the legislation currently in place, but what really matters is that the police and security services have the resources necessary to act effectively under that legislation. And will she confirm that such resources will in future be made available? And finally, Mr. Speaker, during the election campaign, the Prime Minister spoke of ripping up human rights to fight terrorism. Will the Home Secretary confirm that there is absolutely nothing in the Human Rights Act or the European Convention on Human Rights that would prevent us taking a robust approach to terrorism, and therefore will she confirm that there are no plans to tear up human rights and that we can tackle terrorism and uphold the standards of this society without ripping up human rights?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As far as the Commission, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and I thank you for her kind welcome. The Commission for Extremism will, of course, the recommendations that it decides to make will need to be brought back to Parliament. So I would expect that there will be full scrutiny of what the recommendations are when they are brought back to be taken forward by Parliament. In terms of resources, I can confirm that we will always provide the resources necessary to keep our citizens safe. We have already announced substantial uplifts to the security services. There are 1,900 new people joining the security services up until 2020, and there's an increase in the amount of armed officers being made available in the country. I can also say to her that later this year we'll be doing a full-scale counter-terrorism exercise involving Police Scotland and forces from north of England, and we will always work with the Scottish Government and police to make sure that we keep all parts of the United Kingdom safe.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Will there be an opportunity to give evidence to the Commission for Countering Terrorism and Extremism based on the lessons that we've learnt in the past for countering other totalitarian ideologies like communism and Nazism? And does she accept the fact that these organisations like ISIL, Daesh and Al-Qaeda rise and fall, but the underlying doctrine of what ought to be called un-Islamic extremism persists, and that's what has to be countered, and an active government agency to counter it is what is required?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and he is absolutely right. This comes in many different forms. Un-Islamic extremism is one of the ways of describing it. It's perfectly reasonable. I would expect the Commission for Extremism to ask for people to give evidence so we can make sure we can collect the best information in order to do the best job for our communities.
Yvette Cooper.
Mr. Speaker, can I join with the Home Secretary in remembering the victims and also paying tribute to the immense bravery of emergency services and also of the public as well, and join her in saying that extremists and terrorists must never divide us, be they Islamist extremist or far-right extremist or wherever that violence comes from. I welcome the proposal for the review by David Anderson into these attacks. Could she also tell us a bit more about them? And for example, the Manchester attacker is reported to have been known to the intelligence services and also to have travelled repeatedly to Libya. Could she tell us whether the man who committed this vile attack was on a watch list, whether he was ever stopped by the border force as part of those journeys, and also ensure that the relationship between the intelligence services and the border force is looked at as part of David Anderson's review?
Well, I thank the Right Honourable Lady, and she is right to draw attention to this relationship with the border forces and the security services. I would expect that that is something that they look at as well. I can't give her the additional details that she's seeking at the moment. It is one of the natures, of course, of the security services that they do so much good work, and we are not really at liberty to talk too much about it. But I would hope that the work that he does with them, and it is getting off to start almost immediately, will help find the answers to some of those questions. You know, quite how much they did know about him, whether there were instances that were missed, or whether this was just part of a much greater level of attacks we are sadly witnessing at the moment.
Antoinette Sandbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Home Secretary, can I ask you in joining me in expressing condolences to Elaine McIver, who was killed, an off-duty police officer killed in the Manchester attack, who worked at Winsford Police Headquarters in my constituency, and indeed joining in the praise of Cheshire Police, who went to the aid of their Manchester colleagues, assisting in what was a desperate attack and having a devastating effect on the local community. And can I ask the Home Secretary to confirm that the additional armed officers will be officers allocated across the country, including, for example, to Manchester or Cheshire?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for a question, and of course I will join with her in paying tribute to the immense bravery of the example particularly that she gave of the off-duty policewoman, and also other members of the public who joined in to protect people. The work that Manchester did in responding to the attack was heroic. I can particularly commend the Chief Constable Ian Hopkins, who did such good work, and it was part of a very well practiced and operated scheme where other forces came in to assist. They surged their assistance to make sure, both in police terms and in emergency terms, that the resources were there to protect people and to look after people going forward.
Mrs. Margaret Hodge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Home Secretary's statement. In the days following both Manchester and London Bridge, a number of my constituents were arrested with suspicions around terrorism. And this is the first time that that's happened in Barking and Dagenham. Most of my constituents of all religions, all creeds, all ethnicities share with all of us the horror at the outrages, the praise for the services, and the feelings of empathy for those that have been affected by it. However, she said in her statement that those who perpetrated terrorism seek to spread fear, intolerance, and hate. And I have concerns that in the aftermath of the attacks, that is precisely what could happen in my own constituency. The Muslim community in particular are feeling very vulnerable and very isolated, and the police have not been able to give them the reassurance that they wanted. Would she take steps to ensure that police resources are made available, so that there is a police presence there, so that the allegations of race-hate crimes, which are already growing, are attacked, and so that other instances that will provide security for all communities in my constituency and therefore promote tolerance are brought into place rapidly and not left to fester?
I have long known that the Right Honourable Lady is a magnificent woman, but I had momentarily forgotten that she is indeed a dame. I hope she will forgive me. The Home Secretary.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and I share her concerns that we have to make sure that we don't see an increase in Islamophobia. We must be a country that can deal fairly with all communities. And my honourable friend, the Minister for Policing, is meeting with the Commissioner this afternoon, the Met Commissioner, and will make sure that he raises it with her, thinking particularly of your constituency and in Barking.
This is Cheryl Gillan.
Can I thank my right honourable friend, and through her, the police and security services who put their lives on the line to keep us all safe. And following on from the right honourable lady's question to the Home Secretary, I think the Home Secretary acknowledges that all our communities, and particularly our Muslim community, including my Muslim community in Cheshire, need to have confidence in the protections afforded by those services. So will she ensure that all our police forces have the resources to provide the continuous training that is required for those officers needed to engage in providing those assurances across our communities?
Well, my right honourable friend builds on the question from the honourable lady about hate crime and about what we can do more in our communities. And I do agree with her that we have to make sure that our police have the best training so that they are aware of the best way to approach what could be sensitive issues. We have the National College of Policing, which does provide that sort of training to ensure that they have the information and they can learn the best way to approach sensitive situations. I would also say that last year we published a hate action plan to make sure that people have the confidence to report and that we have the procedures to follow up, because we are in no way complacent about the need to always be on the front foot to reassure communities that we will take seriously any incidents of hate crime.
Sir Edward Davey.
Mr. Speaker, can I associate myself and my party with the expressions of the Home Secretary of sorrow and condolence for all the victims of these horrific terrorist attacks in Manchester and London? During my visit to the Muslim Welfare House in Finsbury on Tuesday, one of the key messages from the Muslim leaders there was that there was a strong feeling that government action on counter-extremism had so far failed to bring together all voices from across the different communities. So will the Home Secretary today guarantee that the new Commission for Countering Extremism will engage with all representative groups
and that no group that wants to help the government defeat extremism will be excluded?
I think it is absolutely essential to make sure that people are aware that the government's counter-extremism initiatives, its prevent initiatives, its initiatives through Channel, are focused on all extremism. So the Right Honourable Lady, for instance, asked me about prevent, and I would just like to remind people that 25% of the Channel referrals, which is the additional part of prevent that some people are put on, are in fact extreme right-wing. And there are some parts of the country where it is extreme right-wing, which is the real danger rather than radical extremist Islamic terrorism. So I would like to reassure the Right Honourable Gentleman that we will make sure that we listen to all parts of the community and different bodies to ensure that the Counter-Extremism Commission has the opportunity to gather all the information necessary.
Shailesh Vara.
Speaker, during the recent terrorist incidents, we all saw images on our TV screens of desperate families and friends going from hospital to hospital, clutching pictures of their loved ones, trying to get more information about their whereabouts. I fully appreciate that telephone lines, helplines were set up, and I understand that in such instances, people can sometimes have injuries whereby they are not recognisable, and people often don't carry identification with them. But nevertheless, given modern technology, is it possible for the Home Secretary to work with her colleagues in government to try to see if there can be a central point where families and loved ones can go to, and also where hospitals can provide information rather than going from hospital to hospital?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his suggestion, and I saw, obviously, those photographs and pictures as well, and they must have been very distressing for the families involved, not knowing what had happened to their loved ones. And we have to make sure, despite that, that the safety of people involved is the first priority when the police and the emergency services arrive to secure the scene. But I will certainly take his suggestion back to the counter-terrorism unit.
Christian Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 members of my immediate family were present in the Manchester Arena bomb, and my contempt for that bomb is heightened by the fact that it wasn't a thrash metal gig, it was Ariana Grande, and the targets were little girls. Does the Home Secretary share my concern that there are continuing far-right hate preachers of the kind of organisations such as the English Defence League, and that perhaps we need to be tightening down on some of their activities as well to prevent further Islamophobia?
Well, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right. We must root out hate, extreme right-wing violent hate, as well as radical Islamic terrorism, wherever we found it. I was the first Home Secretary to ban a far-right group, National Action, which was prescribed last year, which now gives the police the legal basis in which to go after people who join it, and we will continue to be vigilant.
Wendy Morton.
Speaker, I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for coming to the Chamber today and giving us this statement, an opportunity, our first opportunity in this new Parliament actually, to ask questions, important questions about these horrific attacks. My question is very simple, Mr. Speaker, and short. Can she update us on the progress in recruiting the extra armed police officers?
Yes, we have done, I think it is 650 so far. We are on schedule to do the rest as planned, and given these circumstances that we now find ourselves under, I will make sure that we do.
Bill Coyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Time is tight, so I wanted to focus on Borough Market, my constituency. The horrific attack was met with a community spirit, business action, police and NHS response. It was truly second to none and makes me even prouder to be re-elected to serve the area. The Home Secretary said again today that terrorists will never win, but that does require more action. So how is the government ensuring tourist and leisure hotspots like Borough Market are better protected, and what budget is being made available to fit barriers and bollards to protect civilians? How is the government ensuring the NHS is not a victim of major incidents? Southwark hospitals are struggling financially, so what additional budgets are being made available to ensure they have their tremendous effort covered?
How is the government ensuring the police have not just the numbers but resources and powers to prevent atrocities but also act when they occur? And finally, the short, brutal attack was over quite quickly at Borough Market, but it remained closed for over a week, costing some of the small traders tens of thousands of pounds. So what is the government doing to make insurance companies pay out on business interruption clauses, which some are outrageously withholding?
Thank you. I thank the Honourable Gentleman. And can I say how much I enjoyed my visit to Borough Market recently, and what a pleasure it was to see it so vibrant and active. And I hope that everybody will continue or go there to shop for the first time to show their support as well. He asks particularly about resources. In terms of resources, we have put additional resources into the security services and will continue to do that. There is additional money going into the armed police uplifts. We are doing this review. I think the essential thing is to find out to wait for the review so that we know where we have holes, where we should be putting additional support, rather than rushing in now to do so. Can I also tell him that after the ceremony, the event at the memorial ceremony at Southwark Cathedral, I met some of the people who had been at Southwark Hospital, and it was a great honour and privilege to speak to them and hear about the fantastic work they'd done.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the weekend, I drove my family back to London from my constituency. My wife and daughters are Jewish. We were met by a protest where there were anti-Semitic banners and chants, and there were people waving Hezbollah flags, which, for those unfamiliar with the flag, has a big machine gun on it. To make a mockery of the law, somebody had actually put a post-it note on one of the flags saying, "You cannot arrest me because I support the political wing of Hezbollah, not the military wing, this time." Will the Home Secretary, if enough really is enough, begin by taking action against these rallies, ban them so they can never happen on the streets of London again, and ensure that the whole of Hezbollah is made a prescribed organisation?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and it is always distressing to see that sort of march going on, and the sort of provocation that he has described must have been very upsetting for him and his family. And I will certainly consider what he's put out, what he's suggesting, and come back to discuss it with him, and if needed, the House.
There is a balance of obligations, I must say to colleagues today. On the one hand, I'm keen to accommodate the extensive interest in this matter. On the other hand, I should just advise the House that the business statement follows, in which there is usually interest, and no fewer than 29 colleagues wish to speak in the debate on the gracious speech this afternoon, of whom 5 are would-be maiden speakers. I'd like to accommodate them, so brevity is imperative. Mr. Barry Shearman.
Speaker, the Home Secretary, just one bit of advice. Please be very careful about language. A lot of people are alienated when people talk about stamping out and enough is enough. Careful about language. But secondly, are we going to just have one commission? As a West Yorkshire MP, a neighbour of Joe Cox's, and a brilliant group of hard-working MPs working with their community, know that the Muslim community is absolutely disgusted by the terrorist outrages. But could we not have, up and down the country, local commissions working together? One national one, local ones would be a great advantage.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his suggestion, and when the Commission gets started, I can put his suggestion to them to see if that would enhance their work.
Robert Courts.
I am fortunate to know the Muslim community in West Oxfordshire well, and I wonder if the Home Secretary could give some further details of how the Commission will work with local communities for mutual benefit.
Well, I thank my honourable friend. We have an open mind to working out the best way to approach the Commission for Extremism. We will make sure that it covers, as has been suggested, all parts of the country, and make sure that it clearly applies itself to rooting out and to discovering information about extremism wherever it is found. So when we have more information, I will come back to him.
Shannon.
Chairman, there are, according to security sources, some 150 ISIS terrorists living either together or working together or singly in Northern Ireland and the Republic. Can I ask the Home Secretary, would she ensure that the security forces in Northern Ireland, those on the UK mainland and in the Republic, would work together to signally monitor and resource all of the police efforts to ensure that those people do not become a threat to all of us in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland?
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question, and our working relationship with Northern Ireland and the security services is very good, and I will certainly take his suggestion under advisement to ensure that everybody is aware of his concerns and that we continue to step up that work.
James Cartledge.
I welcome the statement by the Home Secretary in answer to the Honourable Friend, the Member for Aldridge and Brownhills, that she believes she is on target to recruit the number of armed officers she is seeking. However, interestingly, I've been speaking to armed officers who protect us on this estate, and there is one common piece of feedback, which is they are worried about the quality of potential recruits because of the disincentive of automatic referral to the IPCC. And I wonder if it's time to consider whether that should still apply in terrorist attacks.
Well, I can reassure my honourable friend that when it comes to certain terrorist attacks like the marauding firearms attack that are sometimes declared when we have a terrorist attack, as we did here, they immediately state, the IPCC, that it is not necessary. So there is a particularly different approach when there is a terrorist attack. But in general, I think the IPCC do an important job for creating that clear line that is actually as useful to the police as it is to the rest of us.
Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say to the Home Secretary that I most certainly join with her in her congratulations to Wayne Hopkins and all our public services in both Manchester and London in these recent attacks. But can I say I set the budget for Greater Manchester Police for this present year. That was a budget where I was faced with cuts from central government. Will she recognise if she wants to bring us all together to fight terrorism, she needs to recognise that combating terrorism, like other things, places real strain on our police service. We need more police officers to combat not simply terrorism, but the things that we need a modern police force to do.
Welcome the honourable gentleman back to the House. We have protected the police budget from 2015 to 2020. I would say to him that we will be doing this review in order to find out what else we could do better to combat terrorism. The security services are leading on the review, looking at what has happened in the past, and we will have an open mind to what is needed, depending on what that review reveals.
Alex Jones.
Mr. Speaker. At present, a person who pleads guilty to being in possession of a well-known extremist publication, which includes instructions on making homemade bombs, will be sentenced typically to just 14 months, so out in 7 months, still radicalised, still a danger. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that the time has come to toughen up sentences under Section 57 and 58 of the Terrorism Act 2000?
I think it's fair to say that that is exactly the sort of instance that I was referring to in my comments earlier. We must look tougher sentencing, as Max Hill has suggested, in those sort of instances.
Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my constituents, can I express our deepest condolences to the victims of the terror attacks and their families. We utterly condemn, like most people in our country, the horrific attacks. Can I ask the Home Secretary if she will heed the warnings of the Mayor of London and the Metropolitan Police head about this £400 million cuts, which would put prevention at risk? And also, can she update the House on where she's got to in ensuring that internet companies take down religious extremist sites and far-right sites immediately that promote violence?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her important question. And can I say that we have had several meetings with the Mayor of London, and I also commend him for the work that he's done. He's been working closely with us to make sure that we are really united on making sure that we get the right approach. Again, I would refer, there have been no plans for police cuts, and we have protected the budget, and I hear those numbers, I simply don't recognise them. In terms of the internet, we are making good progress. We've set up in the UK an internet forum to try and get more action. We're taking down about 2,000 pieces of, they are taking down, after we ask them to, 2,000 pieces of hate material a week. There is more to do, and we are hopeful of having a constructive international agreement with them so that we can get a really proactive approach from the internet companies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I can thank the Home Secretary for her statement. I know she'll agree with me that the people who've committed these atrocities and the idiots who went and stoned Torquay Mosque in reprisal are just two sides of the same coin of hate. How does she see the Commission for Countering Extremism being able to deal with both those threats?
Very good point to make, and I hope that our Commission will do exactly that. We'll make it clear that extremism in any form is, as you say, two sides to the same coin. It is unwelcome in this country, and we need to find out what else we can do to make sure that we reduce it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Minister for her statement. The recent attack on Finsbury Park Mosque, if reports are correct, was premeditated attack by a self-radicalised extremist. Now, my constituency of Batley and Spen knows more than most about the devastation that one extremist can bring. Whilst I welcome the Home Secretary's statement that 25% of the referrals to Prevent have been for far-right extremists, how many of these referrals have been acted upon?
Can I just take the opportunity to commend the work that the Joe Cox Foundation did on the great get-together last weekend. And like many members of the House, took the opportunity of meeting many Labour members as well, so that we could all show something good that had come out of Joe's horrible, terrible death. I've forgotten her question. I'm so sorry.
Referrals are acted
yes,
upon.
okay. So the Prevent activity is referrals from usually from schools, from universities, from community groups, and then they are mostly acted on. Only a smaller portion of them goes through to the Channel programme, and disproportionately larger number of far-right wing ones go through to the Channel programme. So about 25% that go through to the Channel are in fact extreme right wing, but I can come back to her with more numbers if she would like. Thank you.
Nigel Huddleston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Home Secretary receiving sufficient cooperation from the tech giants and social media companies in her efforts to thwart terrorism? And in particular, are they themselves putting sufficient resources into removing inappropriate content quickly enough?
Of course, I know my honourable friend knows a little bit about this, and I'm very grateful for his question. A lot of it is about making sure that the tech companies actually resource sufficiently to ensure that they don't just wait for us to ask them to take down the hate material, but that they take action to make sure that it isn't put up in the first place. We are working with them. There are signs that they will take action, and they are making progress. But I do not underestimate the difficulty and the challenge of making sure that we get a really international agreement, which is where the big prize is.
Rightly, last week there's been concentration on resources in London for policing, but terrorism doesn't respect police authority boundaries. Can I say to the Home Secretary, it's not scaremongering, it's a fact. Next year, Durham Constabulary will have its budget cut by £1.1 million. That's before inflation and wage increases. Can I ask what she's going to do to actually ensure that those regional forces like Durham have the resources to keep the communities safe that they serve?
Mr. Speaker, I do believe that those areas, like Durham, do have the resources that they need to keep people safe. They are all making good progress with making changes to their arrangements so that they can save money, so that they can put more police officers on the front line. If the honourable gentleman has a particular concern, I recommend that he comes and sees my honourable friend, the Police Minister, who I'm sure will want to hear his particular concerns.
Sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm confident that the Home Secretary will agree with me that surely we have the best emergency services in the world. And frankly, their efforts in the last few months particularly have been nothing short of heroic. Can she therefore use her considerable influence to try and ensure that the public sector pay freeze is ended, to ensure that these workers are treated with the dignity and respect that they surely deserve?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her helpful contribution for any future conversations I might have with the Chancellor.
Gates. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to the question by my friend and neighbour from Barking, constituents of mine also had houses next to them raided by the police over recent days. And there are links between the people who carried out the vile murders on London Bridge and Borough Market and several parts of East London. We know that there have been radical so-called preachers like Anjem Chowdhury were recruiting within our community for years before they were eventually jailed. What is the government going to do to deal with, as the Home Secretary said, the ideological issues here?
It's absolutely the nub of what we're trying to address. The fact is these people are becoming weaponised by the crazed ideology of Daesh while they are so often at home over the internet by seeing all the hate material. The message that comes out from Daesh is not to join them anymore in the so-called caliphate, but instead to become weapons in their communities. What we are doing is making sure that we work with the internet companies to take that information down, that we have a programme that reaches out, that tries to protect people in those communities so they don't become radicalised, and we are going to look for what else we can do. That is why we're taking part in a review, looking at the past and looking at the future. We want to make sure that we stop that radicalisation taking hold in people's communities.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I praise the united response of Cardiff communities, particularly faith communities, to the recent attacks, both in condemnation and in solidarity with London and Manchester, particularly given the shocking news that the alleged attacker in Finsbury Park was living in Cardiff. But the Home Secretary mentioned forums to tackle the internet issue. The fact is that there is still far-right and Islamist content on the internet today, on places like YouTube, Twitter and elsewhere. When is she going to get serious about serious sanctions for companies that are failing to deliver on their responsibilities to remove this content?
The Honourable Gentleman will be aware that we are trying to work on a voluntary basis with them, and we are making progress. There is always the danger, is if you abandon the voluntary and you go straight to sanctions, the hate material will just move elsewhere. We want to make sure that we have a resolution to this. We're not frightened of moving to sanctions if that is where we have to go, but a better outcome, I must tell the Honourable Gentleman, would be if we have those companies working with us, putting the resources, as my honourable friend has said, into making sure that those resources are used to make sure that material doesn't go up in the first place.
I've raised with the Home Secretary before about the number of UK-born fighters returning from Syria and what happens to them. Bearing in mind Max Hill's comments and the very low number of TPIMs at the moment, does the Home Secretary expect that TPIMs will go up in number considerably?
The TPIMs do form an important part of the tools that we have to deal with returning foreign fighters. I would say to the Honourable Lady that we do track the foreign fighters very carefully. We recognise that where we can, we recognise that they are potentially the most dangerous cohort of people who could be returning here. The TPIMs are part of the tools. They can use them where it is necessary, and I am involved in all the decision-making around them, but it seems correct that at the moment they have those tools and they use them where they need to. If it becomes necessary to use them more, it may be that we will need additional legislation, in which case I will come back here and ask the Honourable Lady to make that case with me to the Right Honourable Lady who is heading up the Shadow Home Office.
Savile Roberts.
I wonder would the Home Secretary join with me in wishing a full recovery to Lisa Bridget of Minutho, who suffered multiple injuries while waiting for her daughter at the Manchester attack, and of course we sympathise with all victims in the recent atrocities. I note the Home Secretary's recent announcement. Would she commit to consider undertaking an independent review of policing resources as a whole to maintain public confidence in counter-terrorism and cyber hate, of course, but also to essential underpinning community policing?
Well, I would join with the Honourable Lady in wishing Lisa Bridget a swift recovery. I can't see the need for an independent review of policing. I think that they are doing an exemplary job. I think that they need all the support that we in the House can give them at this difficult time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The uplift in armed police officers in West Yorkshire has come directly from neighbourhood policing and from response policing, making day-to-day policing that bit tougher. Is the Home Secretary in a position to update the House about when the review of the police funding formula will be published? And will she accept that it's not exclusively about powers, but it is about the number of police officers who are able to use those powers?
I understand the Honourable Lady's curiosity about the police funding formula. We are still reviewing its position at the moment, and I will come back to her, if I may, when we have made a decision on it.
Seema Malhotra.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to also extend our thoughts to the victims and those who are hospitalised and their families from the recent terrorist outrages. The attacks were indiscriminate. People of all faiths were killed and injured. People of all faiths went to help, whether that be on the scene or in our hospitals and other emergency services. But we know as well that there's this ripple effect of hate crime that carries on afterwards, and that reaches out much wider and affects other communities. Muslims in my constituency and across the country have told me about how they feel more vulnerable and less secure. Will she agree with me that it's important for us in this House to reiterate the message of peace, the message that Islam is a religion of peace, and to also reassure this House, if she can, that in the final days of Ramadan and Eid, that if more support is needed for Muslim communities, that she will ensure that that support is provided?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady, and she is absolutely right in her comments. And in terms of her specific request for more support, we already have a fund of £2.4 million for places of worship, which a number of mosques have applied to make sure that they are safe. And I can announce that next week I'll be opening an additional £1 million specifically, for places of worship, which does address the particular concern that some people have had, which the Right Honourable Lady brought to me, about concerns that in order to apply for the funds, you had to have already had a hate crime in your area. We are now making sure there is additional funds available so that people who are concerned about their mosques can apply for money to support them in their endeavours to keep them safe.
Jack Drewmy.
Mr. Speaker, the police have been magnificent. The faith in this House have stood together in unity. And the Home Secretary is absolutely right that we face a uniquely awful generational threat of terrorism. But can I ask the Home Secretary this? The foremost senior police officers have written to her expressing their concern. They've put in place an emergency plan to protect the public, but they say it's simply not sustainable. They're having to hollow out neighbourhood policing and divert officers from serious and organised crime and historic inquiries, including in relation to child sex exploitation and abuse. The first duty of any government must be the safety and security of its citizens. Does the Home Secretary accept, therefore, that the time has come to reverse those deeply damaging cuts of 20,000 to our police service?
I have, of course, got that letter from the 4 senior police officers about their concerns about resourcing. I would point out to the Honourable Gentleman and to this House that the emergency matters that they referred to were part of the well-organised plan in case these situations took place, like Operation Tempora, which took place. So the system is working. They needed the additional support because, of course, under these circumstances, resources have been pulled very tight, given the additional work that is needed. There are different ways of addressing this, and before rushing in with additional money, I want to make sure that we get the right targets and the right answers. So I will just say to him that I recognise what they're saying. I recognise the fact that we cannot carry on at that emergency level indefinitely, but we are just going to be working with them, with those police officers, to ensure that we get the right response.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Home Secretary confirm that she has received a letter from Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, which is speaking on behalf of the 3 PPCs in the North West, which is pointing out the drastic cuts in policing numbers and the impact on the services? These 3 areas: terrorism, growing gun crime, and also the daily fracking protests in Lancashire. And what the 3 PPCs are saying, and indeed the Merseyside Chief Constable was on television, that in future, if the reductions are not put right and if there's not commitment to further funding, our policing as we know it now will be deteriorating.
Immensely obliged, Honourable Lady.
I will, of course, be responding to that letter, and I do take very seriously the points that have been raised. We must make sure people are kept safe. And I must commend as well the new Mayor of Manchester for the work that he did during the atrocious attack in Manchester. But we will be coming back to him, and if the Honourable Lady would like, I will make sure that she's copied in on any correspondence in answer to that letter.
Rachel Maskell.
Mr. Speaker, the Prevent training programme has come under much criticism. Can the Home Secretary say how this will be critiqued, and will the Anderson Commission address this?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. Prevent has been a great success to many families. I would refer particularly to 150 people who were stopped from travelling to Syria last year, 50 of whom were children. I've been myself and met families who have managed to stop their children travelling to Syria or becoming radicalised because of engaging with it. But I recognise that there is always more to learn. So I will make sure that we still make sure that we build on Prevent, that we improve it where we need to. And it will be part of our review going forward to see whether it works. So we have these two reviews, one looking at what's happened to the security services and one looking forward. But we are not complacent about thinking that Prevent has all the answers. But please don't underestimate the fact that it's done fantastically important work in many different communities up and down the country.
Thomas Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that what the terrible events of recent months show more than ever is the need to continue to promote tolerance between people of different faiths and between people of faith and none?
Absolutely, I agree with that. And the more that we can do in the House to reiterate that message, the better.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As has been said, overseas travel is a frequent factor in radicalisation. So I was very interested to hear what the Home Secretary has just said about trying to prevent such travel rather than just using monitoring and TPIMs when people return. Could she say a little bit more about what she can do? She spoke about families, but particularly about young men that have been influenced by extremist ideology, travelling overseas and then becoming radicalised and turning into terrorists as a result.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady. I mean, the best examples I have seen, and I've seen them both in Manchester, in Leeds, in Birmingham, is of community groups led within the community, so often led by Muslim men and women, about giving a clear direction and reasons not to become radicalised by talking to people on their level, by engaging them in particular activities that they're interested in. This is the sort of work that Prevent does that has been successful, that is about motivating and resourcing community leaders and people with good ideas about how to de-radicalise right at the source of where the young men are. I think that is the best work that we can do as a government.
Kate Green.
Community and faith leaders and members of my community have been outspoken in their revulsion and condemnation of the attacks in Manchester and London. But there's also consternation at reports that members, particularly of the Didsbury Mosque, where Salman Abedi and his family attended, had made reports of his radicalisation, and they do not appear to have been acted upon or heeded. What can the Home Secretary say about that, and what assurance can she give the community that where they make these reports, they will be acted on and that the lack of resources will not present a barrier?
It's a very fair question the Honourable Lady raises, and I have been asking that naturally as well of the security services. I think we shouldn't rush to believe everything that is said about what was and wasn't done during that period. That is one of the reasons for having this review. But it hasn't been about resources. It's been about, I think, really the scale sometimes of the number of people and calls that are coming in. But I would say that people should still encourage people in their communities to make those calls, to use the terrorist hotline. It is up to us as well to lead in that respect, to ensure that we do what we can to make sure that people call out the type of activity that could lead to terrorism as strongly and as often as possible.
Thank you. Order. Just before we move to the business statement by the Leader of the House, I must myself now make a very short statement. In accordance with Standing Order number 2A, I will now announce the arrangements for the ballot for the election of deputy speakers. The ballot will be held in Committee Room 8 from 10 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. on Wednesday, the 28th of June. Nominations may be submitted in the table office and in the procedural hub in Portcullis House from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Tuesday, the 27th of June. Nomination forms and a briefing note with more details about the election are available in the table office, the procedural hub and the vote office. I hope that is helpful to colleagues. Thank you. Business statement. The Leader of the House. The Leader of the House, Andrea Leadsom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The business for next week will be Monday the 26th of June, continuation of the debate on the Queen's speech on Brexit and foreign affairs. Tuesday the 27th of June, continuation of the debate on the Queen's speech on education and local services. Wednesday the 28th of June, continuation of the debate on the Queen's speech on health, social care and security. Thursday the 29th of June, conclusion of the debate on the Queen's speech on the economy and jobs. Friday the 30th of June, the House will not be sitting. The provisional business for the week commencing the 3rd of July will include on Monday the 3rd of July the second reading of the Air Travel Organisers Licensing Bill. Mr Deputy Speaker, colleagues will also wish to know that subject to approval by the House today and the progress of business, the House will rise for the summer recess on Thursday the 20th of July and return on Tuesday the 5th of September. The House will then rise for the conference recess on Thursday the 14th of September and return on Monday the 9th of October. Thank you.
Valerie Vaz.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I start by welcoming the Leader of the House to her post and for her first business statement. And can I also, Mr Deputy Speaker, pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Aylesbury. He was an excellent Leader of the House and will make a fine Lord Chancellor, protecting the independence of the judiciary as we uphold the rule of law. Mr Deputy Speaker, there are conventions, and one of the conventions is that when a statutory instrument has been prayed against, the government will provide time for a debate. And because the election was called, the debates on PIP regulations, tuition fee regulations, and I think the one on rape clause as well, were not debated, although scheduled for the 19th of April. So could the Leader of the House find time for debates on those regulations? Mr Deputy Speaker, this wonderful, resilient country of ours is grieving. From Manchester to London Bridge, Westminster to Finsbury Park, Kensington to Batley and Spen. The pain of loss never goes away, but it may lessen. But lives are changed forever, and we mourn the loss of the talent as we hear about these lives, the loss of talent for this country. Earlier today, the Prime Minister made a statement on Grenfell Tower. I'm not sure why it took a week for the Prime Minister to confirm that all the people who were affected could finally get a home, could be housed nearby, and that any payments made to them will not affect any other entitlement. But could I ask the Leader of the House to confirm, and perhaps you can do it in a letter to the library and place it in the library, that the number of firefighters, councillors for firefighters, I think has been reduced from 14 to 2 under the previous mayor, now the Foreign Secretary. Mr Deputy Speaker, Kensington Council had the reserves, but not the staff to deal with the disaster. Other local authorities are helping, such as Ealing Council, who are running the Rest Centre in Westway. The Prime Minister yesterday said it was the fault of the state at local and national level. It is the elected members of the council and the government who are responsible and accountable. The state, through their public servants, have responded brilliantly. They are blameless. Earlier, there seemed to be some confusion in the statement about a review of building regulations. So could the Leader of the House make time for a statement before the inquiry, given that the review of building regulations, as recommended by the coroner in 2013, was announced by the former member for Croydon Central and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff in October 2016. When asked when it will take place, we were told in due course. The government want to consult again on social care, but an independent commission, the Dilnot Commission, reported in 2011. Could the Leader of the House say whether the Dilnot report will be part of the consultation, or is it now abandoned, yet another report that is not actioned? Dilnot cost his proposals at 1.7 billion. Simple maths would tell us that the 3 billion top-down reorganisation could have saved the government money. Mr Deputy Speaker, it's unclear how Parliament will be kept informed during EU negotiations. Yes, we do want a running commentary, so could the Leader of the House ensure that a statement on a timetable for a debate, on a report back on where we are with the negotiations? It's particularly important, Mr Deputy Speaker, as the Chancellor appears to be providing a running commentary of his own, setting out his own different policy. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Queen's speech mentions a new industrial policy. Members for Aberavon, the new Labour member for Gower, Swansea East and Swansea West want a statement or a debate on the government's position on the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon, which is part of the old industrial policy. Without a decision from the government soon, the project may collapse, putting at risk 2,000 local jobs. Could the Leader of the House please say whether we can have that debate?
Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to welcome new members and say goodbye to old members as well and thank them. Some members used to turn up regularly to business questions and they're not here. But I do want to make a special mention to the Honourable Member for Kensington. The people put their trust in her and she has repaid it, showing them what a great MP she is. And this time last year, we all came together to remember another brilliant colleague. We will have a permanent reminder in this chamber of her campaigning zeal, her energy and her love for humanity. Helen Joanne Ledbetter-Cox will be a permanent reminder to us that we will not be divided by hate as we work in this place for the common good and in the public interest for our United Kingdom. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's early days for all of us. I fully understand. Hopefully you'll bear with me as I make mistakes too. Can I first welcome the Honourable Lady? I've always admired her enormously, and it's a great pleasure to be working together, as I'm sure we will very well. And also to respond to her kind tribute to the Honourable Member, the Right Honourable Member for Aylesbury, who is a fantastic colleague, and I'm sure will be absolutely committed to his new role as Secretary of State for Justice. She's asked for time for a debate on carryover regulations from the last Parliament. I will absolutely take that away and look into it. I'm sure that that's in hand, but I will make sure that it is. She mentioned the appalling loss of life in recent weeks due to the deliberate and evil actions of terrible people who are just either misguided or evil. And she's exactly right to raise that. Everybody right across this House shares the horror at some of the actions that have been perpetrated against innocent citizens. As she also mentions the terrible fire at Grenfell Tower, and I certainly went and saw for myself what devastation it's caused, and our hearts go out to those poor people. And I hope that colleagues are reassured by what the Prime Minister had to say in her statement today, that we will leave no stone unturned in getting to the bottom of what's happened, and also in doing everything possible, including, of course, looking closely at building regulations to see if there's more that can be done to ensure this can never happen again. She's asked about resources in firefighters. I think we will, of course, be reviewing that situation. She will be aware that, fortunately, in recent years, the number of fires and lives lost due to fires has reduced quite dramatically. This, of course, puts a very different complexion on it after the harrowing events at Grenfell Tower, which will require that we look again at that. But I absolutely assure her and all honourable members that this government will ensure that our emergency services have the resources that they need. She asks about the Dilnot Commission and the review of social care. She will be aware, as all honourable members are, that we do have an ageing population. There will be over 2 million over 75s within not many years, within the next decade, I believe. And that, of course, does require that we tackle this situation, and it does need us to look very holistically at how we can best manage the needs of an ageing population with the needs to pay for what is increasingly expensive. And then, of course, she also mentioned the Queen's speech, our new industrial policy. I hope she shares my excitement about some of the measures for making the UK leading in the world in electric vehicle technology. Some of our commercial spaceflight programmes will be very exciting, creating new high-technology jobs, well-paid jobs for the future. But I will absolutely take away her request specifically about where are we on the Swansea Bay tidal lagoon. And then finally, I would also like to say my own tribute to all those colleagues who are no longer in this House, who didn't win their seats this time. It's always a great sadness to say goodbye to so many good colleagues, but it's also wonderful to have the new blood coming into the House, and I'd like to welcome all new colleagues right across the House. Really looking forward to working with you, hearing your views, and please do come and talk to me anytime. My office is just down the corridor there. And then finally, as the Honourable Lady said, the memorial to our dear colleague Jo Cox will be unveiled tomorrow, and all colleagues who'd like to come along to that will be very welcome. And I thank her for her opening remarks.
The unveiling is on Saturday, and as the Leader of the House said, the Speaker would be glad to receive any applications. After the shortest tenure as Leader of the House in parliamentary history, can I call Amanda Milling?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I ask my right honourable friend if we can have a debate in government time about the ways in which society lotteries can increase the amount of money being channelled to local charities?
Well, I think it's an excellent idea. I mean, obviously, the work that all of the jackpot-oriented lotteries do in raising money for charities is absolutely valuable. It sounds to me like an excellent bid for an adjournment debate.
Pete Wishart.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Leader of the House for announcing the business for next week and warmly welcome her to our new front bench role, and I very much look forward to working with her in the future. Being awarded the position of Leader of the House either suggests you're on the way up the goosey pole or on the way down, and I'm pretty certain the Right Honourable Lady is off the former category. And can I also thank her for announcing the recess dates? We, again, on these benches are profoundly disappointed that somehow we can't design a summer recess that accommodates school holidays from all parts of the United Kingdom, and I hope we can work together to resolve some of the difficulties around the conference recess. And by God, Mr Deputy Speaker, has she got a job on her hands? This is a government that arrogantly and unnecessarily called an early general election to secure an overwhelming majority, to find themselves humbled, diminished, without any majority whatsoever.